Alright, after several months, my long-awaited next countdown is finally here. And this time, I'll be talking about games that I wanted to like, but didn't. Now, I know what a lot of you are probably thinking right now. Wouldn't this be considered a disappointing games list? Well, kind of, but not really. You see, if a game is disappointing, that means it was a letdown compared to what I thought it would be. This, however, is based on games that I didn't like as much as I wanted to. Games that I was really counting on, and yet they ended up not appealing to me. Also, unlike disappointing games, which I can still like even if I found them disappointing, since this is a list of games I wanted to like, needless to say there won't be any games that I did like. And as I'm sure I've said in previous countdowns, there will be some beloved games on this list, so I don't intend on offending fans of these games. So, let's get started. One thing you should probably know about me is that I think that I might be more of a 2D Metroid guy than a 3D Metroid guy. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy the Prime games, but I just find myself enjoying the side-scrollers more. As a matter of fact, my top 3 favorite Metroid games are 2D ones, those being Super, Fusion, and Samus Returns. It's just too bad I can't say the same about Zero Mission. Now, this is a game I probably should like, because it fits my criteria for what I think a remake should be. It manages to feel like a new game while still feeling like a remake of the original. It doesn't just put 95% of its effort into nostalgia pandering and give us basically the exact same game just with like 3 noticeable changes. This game not only updates the graphics and sound font, but also gives us more abilities, areas, bosses, and even some new cinematics every once in a while, which is something you don't usually see in Game Boy Advance games. And best of all, it gives us a map so we're no longer constantly wandering around in the dark having no clue where you're going. And yet I still can't find myself liking it. The closest I can really think of to a reason to justify my disliking for it is the game's final level, Chozodia, as some of you longtime viewers of mine might know. On paper, it sounds like an awesome idea for a level, getting to explore a whole new region of planet Zebus, and for the first time ever, getting to play as Samus without her suit. But let's just say playing as Zero Suit Samus was much more fun in Smash Bros. The reason is because I find this new segment very repetitive and dull, and it doesn't feel all that suspenseful. Also, hiding from them can be annoying, especially since sometimes they make you think they can't see you when they really can. And it's made worse on hard mode, because some of the save points are blocked off, making the save points that are available to you spaced too far apart from each other. And don't give me the challenge excuse, because forcing you to redo parts of the level that you've already beaten does not make a game harder, just more tedious. The 2 bosses you find in this level are also terrible, but there's another complaint that I recently realized I have with this level. The object of the game is to strike down Mother Brain. So naturally you do, and now the game's over, right? Nope, you're thrown into a completely new mission that has nothing to do with the rest of the game's main objective. It's not like in the post-games of the Pokémon games where the completely different objective you get isn't until after you beat the main game. Here, you have to play this final out-of-nowhere mission in order to reach the credits screen. Even Other M did this better. But that's just one level. I shouldn't let one level in the game stop me from liking a game altogether. Well, after all these years, I think I finally put it together as to why this one level in the game was all it took to sour my overall experience of the game. The game itself takes about 2 hours to beat, while you spend about a half hour in Chozodia. That means that a good quarter of this game is spent in this terrible final level. And when that's the last level in the game, that means I'm going to remember this game by this terrible final quarter. And not only is this finale bad, but I find this game's overall soundtrack kinda boring. I mean, there were a small handful of songs in the game I did like, but most of the others, not really. Then again, to be fair, I wasn't really a fan of the original soundtrack either, so I guess that makes it a faithful remake. Overall, while I appreciate Zero Mission's efforts to feel more properly modernized, at least modernized for its time, I just didn't really care for the final product. Rayman is a game that definitely looks like a classic, but sometimes looks are deceiving. This game may look harmless on the outside, but once you actually get your hands on it, you'll probably regret it. The bottomless pits and spikes are placed in some of the worst places you could have them in a video game, so you can expect cheap death after cheap death after cheap death. Oh, but you thought that was bad? Well, the game also expects you to have the fastest reaction time in the world, because 1 second the coast looks perfectly clear, and the next second you are instantly bombarded by something that came completely out of nowhere. Because of that, you will constantly run out of lives, especially considering how rare extra lives are. And when combined with Rayman smiling throughout the game, it starts to feel like this game is mocking me. Why would they take such a really nice looking game and make it completely unfair? Well, supposedly Ubisoft didn't do a very good job at playtesting it, which is why the game is so unforgiving. What, did they get expert gamers to playtest this game? Because that is a terrible idea. If you want to playtest the game and make sure it's fair for gamers, you should make sure the game is fair for almost everyone. Get someone who is probably like the average gamer to playtest it, so that people don't have to keep throwing their controllers across the room. And when these already near impossible levels are already really long with how many segments they have, then unless you somehow manage to breeze through this game, the save points in it are basically hours apart from each other. And that's assuming you even know how to give yourself more continues. Which, believe me, you're going to need to learn that cheat code. But even if you know it, it gets annoying having to wait for Rayman to stop doing pointless cartwheels before you can finally retry the levels. But why would I even want to retry the levels when the game did this terrible of a job at playtesting this game? If you hate games that are this difficult, then this game really isn't worth your time. For many years, fans have been begging for another Paper Mario game that plays out like the older ones. They've been wanting this ever since Super Paper Mario, and even though that game started to get more praise over the years, it doesn't help that not only does it not follow the classic Paper Mario gameplay formula, but the Paper Mario games that came out after it lacked a lot of the charm and inventive gameplay that their predecessors had. And no, I'm not counting Thousand Year Door for the Switch, because that's a remake of an already existing game. I mean, I actually kinda enjoyed Sticker Star and Color Splash, but even I won't deny that it needs to go back to its roots. However, we did eventually get Origami King, which did seem like it was trying hard to be like the classics since Sticker Star and Color Splash were, since it doesn't rely on consumable weapons nearly as much as those two games did, and it seemed like it really was trying to have good storytelling elements. And it answered some of my prayers too, by finally having the villain be someone who isn't Bowser, and having all the levels be connected in different ways instead of just taking the easy way out by somewhat restricting exploration with doors and maps. So by all means, I really should like this game. So why didn't I? For one simple reason. The battle system. Yep, that's the whole reason why I didn't like it. I know that doesn't sound like much, but just let me explain myself. Not only is there still no sign of the actual experience point system, but the battles are all glorified minigames. These ones have a ring system where you have to keep rotating the ring in order to get the best possible outcomes in the battle, whether it be knocking large groups of enemies out as fast as possible, or trying to find the safest way to hurt the bosses. Sounds like a lot of fun, isn't it? There's just one problem. Battling is one of the things that RPGs are known for, and you spend a pretty big percentage of the game doing them. They can get a little bit repetitive, but they're not repetitive enough to ruin the game for most of us. So when you basically keep having to play the same minigame over 100 times throughout the entire game, yeah, you can imagine that it would get extremely repetitive. And that's really sad since, again, I really should like this game because it did answer a lot of our prayers. But then again, if people are allowed to hate Wish despite its attempts at being like the classic Disney movies, then I guess that I don't have to like this game either. At least I actually addressed the fact that intelligent systems did actually want to answer everyone's prayers, even if it was handled in a less than desired way in the final product. Halloween is one of the most awesome times of the year. So you can imagine that I definitely enjoy the first Castlevania game because it has Halloween-like elements to it. Too bad it also has a lot of classic NES elements in it too. The NES is home to a lot of very difficult and unforgiving platformers that I do not have any plans of playing. I usually like to stick to Nintendo games, which usually have much fairer difficulty than these, so by playing this game, I really came out of my comfort zone. I was hoping that Zelda 2 and its frustrating difficulty was as bad as it gets, but oh boy, this game somehow proved me wrong. The way this game throws way too many enemies at you at once, and a lot of flying enemies that fly really fast and in really annoying patterns, making them near impossible to dodge. And the knockback only makes things even worse because if you're not careful, an enemy can bump you off the platform for a one-hit kill. Before anyone calls me out for hating challenges, there are ways to make a game challenging without making it this maddeningly cheap. And that's not even mentioning the health system. You'd think that the hearts give you more health like in a lot of games, but no, they're your ammo. The actual healing items are these pot rows, which wouldn't be a problem if they were easier to get. In most games, you can get items that restore your health by breaking objects or killing enemies. Here, however, you get them by hitting this random brick in the wall that will drop a pot roast to restore your health. So unless you feel like stopping to check every wall in the game with your whip, you'll be constantly hanging on by the skin of your teeth. And to add to that, if you rage quit from the game and plan to not come back into it until later, then unless you have restore points, if you decide to give this game another chance in the future, you have to start all the way from level 1. That's especially infuriating, threatening to erase all your progress if you stop playing. And my final issue with the gameplay can be pretty much summed up like this.
Come on. Move it! Could you be any slower?
Thankfully, I've played some of the other Castlevania games, and I had a lot more fun with them because they actually have some form of save option. And even though the difficulty can still be cheap at times, I prefer this difficulty over the slaughterhouse that is the first game. So at least I can still call myself a Castlevania fan. However, even with that, the first game will always hold a place as one of, if not the most frustrating and unfair game I have ever played. Ristar has some of the things I really look for in a video game. Bright and vibrant visuals and nice music. Guess I should expect as much from the company that's known for the Sonic franchise, and I guess I can see why it's considered a cult classic by many gamers. It's just too bad I'm not one of those people. This game requires truckloads of patience in order to be able to beat. Just how much you have to keep being perfectly precise with everything, and waiting around all the time. Last I checked, video games are supposed to be entertainment. Does waiting around this much sound fun to you? And some of the things that can hurt you are really small and easy to glance over until you get hit. How was I supposed to know that this very tiny piece of rubble was a real in-game hazard? Now you might be surprised if this game is higher than Rayman, since previously on my channel I've stated that I think Rayman is the worst one of the two. And I still think that. So if I hate Rayman more, then why is Ristar higher on the list? Because while Rayman is worse, at least that game had multiple games in this respective franchise, so it wasn't my only chance to enjoy a Rayman game, even though the only one I enjoyed at all was the third one, but at least that was something. This, however, is the only Ristar game. So unless they make a sequel sometime in the future, this was my only chance to enjoy a Ristar game. Also, at least with Rayman, I've seen a lot of people who agree with me that that game is overly difficult to the point of being unplayable. Ristar, however, I feel like I'm the only one who thinks that way about this game. And even when I hear people say it's frustrating, they always say that it's not frustrating enough to be unplayable. Are you kidding me? I mean, I respect their opinions, but not a single person agrees with me on this? I've even been repeatedly mocked for rightfully finding this game frustrating. You have no idea how awful it is when you're the only person who finds a game way too hard, and everyone insults you for it. Well, at least most of you don't know how that feels. If I liked this game and didn't find it this much of a test of patience, I wouldn't have to put up with all these people ganging up on me and mistreating me like this. I don't usually get insulted this much for struggling with a game that people have an easy time with. Well, now we found ourselves a star that doesn't shine. I enjoyed Final Fantasy VII. While it has aged poorly in some aspects and the opening is pretty boring because of how bland Midgar looks, I still enjoyed the game overall, especially the soundtrack, and the surprisingly wide variety of environments in the game. And so when the remake was announced, I, like many Final Fantasy fans, was looking forward to it. I played the game and I did like some of the improvements the game made, such as a map and making it a lot clearer where you're supposed to go. It also brought us some great new cinematics, including much needed updates to older cutscenes. Though I did start to get suspicious when I was already halfway through the game and we still haven't left Midgar yet, despite the fact that we only spent the first 4 hours of the original game there. So, what reason did this game have for having us still be in this still dull-looking Midgar even when we're this far into the game? You're not gonna believe this. This game only remade the Midgar portion of the game. What? Are you serious? They just took a 4-hour segment and bloated it out to a 24-hour game. And to justify its length, they just added a bunch of filler to justify making just one segment of a game 7 times longer than it originally was. The 10 minutes you spent in the sewers of Don Corneo's mansion? Now 40 minutes. The hour and 15 minutes you spent in the Shinra Tower? Now 4.5 hours. And several missions in the game that the original version didn't need. I have never heard of a remake that only remakes the first part of something. Oh, but that's only part 1. There are more parts to the remake. Oh yeah, I understand. Quick question. Wouldn't it be more efficient and faster to remake the full game all in one game and not bloat it out with all this filler? Even when Disney remakes their movies, at least they have the decency to keep it all in one movie. So why couldn't this game do the same thing and keep it all in one game? especially when this game's being made by Square Enix, the company that is obsessed with procrastinating games and keeping us all waiting forever for games even after premiering the first trailer for them. I'm just surprised if the next part of the remake is already out by now, considering how long they made us wait for Kingdom Hearts 3 even after finally announcing it. Which, by the way, I think the second part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake is an overall better game than the first part, because it feels much nicer actually being able to explore the world as opposed to being stuck in Midgar, aside from where it keeps randomly cutting to Zack Fair when he doesn't really do anything in the game. And even though it has the same problem as this game, only remaking a section of the game instead of the whole game, that was more so the fault of the first part of the remake. I just hope we're not old geezers by the time we finally get the full package. Oh, by the way, I love how this game censors Tifa's design, yet they're okay with having Barrett say the S word probably like dozens of times throughout the game. Don't you love when a game has its censorship priorities backwards? But yeah, I didn't like this game, and the only thing it's really good for are the music and cutscenes. You guys might have noticed that it's been a long time since my last time doing a video ranking every game I first played in certain years. That's because of the combination of me suffering from a bit of countdown burnout, and because of how everyone keeps carelessly ignoring my games I first played in certain years list for some stupid reason. I figured if no one's going to watch them, why should I even bother wasting my time making them? But I will say, if you're wondering what game would have been at the bottom of my games I played in 2021, that spot definitely would have gone to the Switch version of the original Dragon Quest. As some of you know, I love RPG games, especially Pokémon, the Mario RPGs, and Kingdom Hearts. So I decided to give one of the oldest RPG franchises a try. I felt it would be an appropriate place to start with the modernized version of the first game. The problem is that this is not modernized. It's pretty much just the same game as the original, just with a different coat of paint. And like other old school RPGs, this game has no sense of direction. This game doesn't tell you where to go next, so unless you've memorized the destinations and or map, you'll just be aimlessly wandering around the overworld hoping to trigger certain events. Except they don't even make it clear enough if you did do the right thing. At least the older Final Fantasy games had cutscenes that at least made it clear that you did what you were supposed to do. This, on the other hand, has no sense of progression at all aside from level grinding. And because of that, the whole game is just walking around, fighting enemies, and gaining experience. I guess maybe this was excusable back in the days of the original version because our standards were lower, but nowadays we have RPGs that have much more to them than just that stuff. So if you're going to remake this game, at least correct that problem instead of just changing the graphics and soundtrack. I even tried using an online walkthrough to help me, and I only found one, and even that one didn't prove to be much help. I guess they do such a terrible job of explaining what you need to do that even online walkthroughs won't save you. At least Metroid Zero Mission had the decency to add in a map screen, let alone tell you where to go at times. This, however, decides, nah. As a result, this is just a nothing game. Throughout the entire game, I just felt nothing. And it makes me feel a bit unsure about playing the rest of the Dragon Quest games. Maybe I'll try them someday, but as of currently, I don't have many plans of it.
It's a game about nothing. How do we know when it's over?
I do. You want to know a type of level that's surprisingly quite rare in video games? Old Western theme levels. Yeah, believe it or not, even though Old Western theme settings in cartoons are at least common enough, do you want to know how many Old Western theme levels I've been to in video games? Well, here's the entire list of them. That may sound like a lot, but when we're talking about from hundreds of games, yeah, that's pretty uncommon. So naturally, hearing that there's a franchise where pretty much the entire games are Old Western themes sounded like it would give me what I wanted. And so I decided to give the series a try, starting of course with the first one. And was I satisfied with what I got? Well, why would it be on here if I was? Now, those of you who saw my disappointing games list probably knew I was building up to this one, but it's true. So throughout the entire game, the formula is basically just this. Make as many preparations as you can to defend the areas from the enemies before nightfall. Then when nightfall happens, defend said areas from the invading enemies. Rinse and repeat over and over again throughout the entire game. Oh, and by the way, these raids can take about 20 minutes. Remember the mission in Majora's Mask where you had to defend the barn from the aliens? You know how you'd have to fight them off for longer if you had the inverted Song of Time on? Well, imagine if you could do that to slow down time 4 times, and you did this mission dozens of times throughout the entire game. Well, that's exactly what this game is. Would have helped if the enemies actually had variety to them instead of just being Grox, and stronger Grox, and Grox with more health. You get what I'm saying here? And if that wasn't tedious enough, do you want to know how this game chooses to pad out its length? By having you do multiple defense missions in the same levels. Doesn't sound too bad? Well, because you go around the entire level maps in every mission with very little changes anyways, It literally just feels like the same mission. So much that I just wanted to get to the next level already. And not because I wanted to feel like I was actually making progress, but because I was sick of the levels I already spent multiple missions on and wanted to go to the next one for at least some form of change. If these missions feel like the exact same ones, why not just save time and have only one mission per level? Oh, that's right, because then the game would be too short. Well, considering how stale this game's formula is, I'd say it would have worked better as a shorter game. I haven't played the other Dillon games, so I wouldn't know if they've improved, but I'm not getting my hopes up. Old Western themed scenarios deserve better than just a glorified enemy gauntlet masquerading as a game. I've been wanting to get into the Mystery Dungeon games, because I've heard they have some very engaging stories and some beautiful music, but unfortunately I just couldn't bring myself to like them, no matter how much I wanted to. I've played Blue Rescue Team and Explorers of Time, and while the stories definitely kept me on my seat wondering what happened next, and the music is definitely great art, I just couldn't get past the monotonous gameplay. But if there's one game of the two that I feel deserves a spot more, it's definitely Explorers of Time. Because the story is even better than Blue Rescue Team. It actually gets really dark at times, which, while not necessarily uncommon for sequels, these dark tones have a tendency to be very effective, and this is no exception. It also brought in some improvements to the gameplay, though even with that, there were still 3 big gameplay issues that the game still didn't fix that dragged down my experience with it. The first one is the hunger system. For some reason, the Mystery Dungeon games felt the need to include a mechanic where you need to keep eating, or else your HP will slowly drain over time until you die. It's like how having a poison Pokemon in the main games would have an additional effect of said Pokemon slowly losing HP every few steps you take, except, well, at least then you only had to worry about one Pokemon fading. This time it's happening to you. I mean, the poison status effect is already in this game too. Don't you think that's enough? And if you run out of health, that's where my next problem comes in. You not only lose money, but you lose half your items. So if you brought a super rare item with you into the level, you can expect that you'll probably have to say bye-bye to said super rare item if you die. I mean, sure, there is a place where you can store items, but that doesn't make it right to make the penalty for losing this brutal. And my final problem? Your partner is a complete idiot. Every time your partner sees an enemy Pokemon, your partner will stubbornly decide to walk up to said Pokemon and trigger a battle with it. And because you can only take one step per turn when in battle, it's like if you and your partner were tied up by a giant rubber band and your partner is holding you back by refusing to let you budge an inch. Sometimes you just want to get to the next floor in time, and the exit is only like 10 steps away, but you can't do it because your stupid partner will completely hinder your movement until the battle's over. Come on, stop it! I'm dying here! Just let me get out of here already! There are also a couple of other annoyances, like how the moves don't look as cool as they do in other Pokemon games, and how annoying louder it is with how you have to sit through that stupid wake-up call every morning, which I didn't even find funny the first time. But the biggest detractor for me was the gameplay. Once again, I really wanted to love this game, because the pieces of a masterpiece of a game are there. I'll even say that out of all the games on this list, this was the closest out of all of them that I came to loving. If they had just fixed the terrible gameplay, this probably would have been one of my favorite Pokemon games, and maybe even one of my favorite games on the DS. Though I will say that this game isn't necessarily bad. Number 1, however, is a completely different story. Before we get to number 1, I'm going to list off some honorable mentions. Donald Duck Going Quackers. This game definitely feels like a classic. The one thing that ruined the experience for me, however, was that I was unlucky enough to get the N64 version, which forces you to buy a stupid controller pack if you want to save your game. And even when I got one, it wasn't enough. Even if it looks like you saved, next time you turn it on, all your save data is gone. Why couldn't it have had a save feature that doesn't require this stupid controller pack like pretty much every other N64 game? Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory. Even for a rhythm-based entry to the Kingdom Hearts saga, I expected better of it. It doesn't even have as many cool cinematics as its predecessors, since most of them are just montages of cutscenes from previous games, and pretty much nothing of substance happens in the game either. I'll even say that Recoded held more value than this game. Skies of Arcadia. Like with Donald Duck Going Quackers, it's only really here because I got the wrong version of the game, that being the Dreamcast version. So I wasted hundreds of dollars getting both this game and a Dreamcast, and even when I finally got it, I had to constantly keep resetting the system because the Dreamcast has probably the worst performance out of any system I've ever played. But at least I found the game decent. Final Fantasy VIII. What's the point of calling this an RPG if the enemies scale with your level? That completely destroys the entire point of level grinding. And aside from that, I can't remember many characters in the game. And even the ones I do remember, most of them I only remember because they were in Kingdom Hearts. Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes. What keeps this game from being on here is that I still liked it a little. I mean, it did answer my prayers for a Three Houses Warriors game. There are 4 things that keep me from loving it. The monastery has been completely replaced with this dull, gray, and completely ugly looking camp area. Sophis is replaced with this annoying and ugly companion named Arval. The fully animated cutscenes look really grainy looking for some reason, and it has a lot of horribly botched character moments, such as Edelgard allowing Bernadetta's abusive father to run the Southern Church, and for some reason making Byleth and Gerald evil. I really love the Sonic series. Their games have proven to be really awesome, and they have helped this franchise earn its spot as one of my favorite video game franchises. But one thing about it that's really upsetting is that in recent years, Sonic games haven't been the same. I mean, sure, their movies and TV shows have been doing a pretty good job, but as for the games, do you want me to tell you the last time we had a good Sonic game was? Over 10 years ago. Ever since then, their games have ranged from being just fine to being completely abysmal. And even Sonic Mania, the game everyone praises, I saw it as mostly just a nostalgia-pandering rehash. Then one day, we got the announcement of the newest 3D installment, Sonic Frontiers. I was a bit hesitant to play it because of how long it had been since our last good Sonic game, so I decided to wait to hear the opinion on the general consensus. And they said it was a masterpiece. Could it be? Have my prayers finally been answered? Was there still hope? Of course not! The entire game is just running around the overworld looking for memory pieces, keys, and stuff like that. And it doesn't help by how these overworlds just feel extremely bland, empty, and lifeless. They're not even pretty to look at, they're just so dull and ugly looking that they make Sonic Boom Rise of Lyrics environments look like Rainbow Road. And it's made even worse by quite possibly the worst graphics in any Switch game I've played. Oh, you thought Sword and Shield's graphics were terrible? At least those graphics weren't noticeably terrible aside from a few areas. Just look at how much pop-up there is. I could forgive this in an N64 or PS1 game, but on the Switch and PlayStation 4, there's no excuse. Other than Sonic being fast, making it harder to load up the levels in time. But maybe that's why Sonic isn't cut out for open world style gameplay. I'm honestly getting tired of open world gameplay, especially since it makes graphics harder to properly modernize, and this might be where it's at its absolute worst. For combining bad graphics with outrageously bad gameplay. I mean, sure, there are some levels in the game that play out like classic Sonic levels, but those end up feeling more like an interruption to your progress than anything. You see, in an actually good Sonic game like Sonic Adventure, these levels actually have narrative purpose, because they're actually relevant to the plot. Heck, even Sonic 06's levels had more narrative purpose. Here, they're just randomly placed in random areas in the overworld, don't do anything to advance the plot, and just come off as more so of an excuse to justify it being a Sonic game. By the time I reached the 4th out of the 5 islands, I honestly felt really depressed playing the rest of this game, because I just wasn't having any fun with it. I heard that the DLC is a lot better than the main game, but because of how depressingly boring the game itself was for me, I'm not sure I really want to spend any more of my time and money on it. I actually had hoped that these games were finally going to redeem themselves, but by the halfway point, my hope had pretty much faded, and it made me even more worried about the future of this franchise. I don't think it's the worst Sonic game, I still hate 3D Blast and Sonic Genesis GBA more, but this game has practically dashed all hopes I had of Sonic games being good again. And I really don't want to think that way about Sonic. I love this franchise. Maybe someday it'll make a comeback, I'll just have to wait and see. But whether it does or not, this game still deserves its spot at number 1 on this list.